So I don't know why I'm popping on here, or what I want to talk about, but I just felt like I wanted to just come on and speak out loud, dealing with something unexpectedly that happened in my personal life, and it gets me to think, like, what am I supposed to do here? What am I? I want to think of, what are we supposed to do on this earth? What are we supposed to aim for? Who are we supposed to be? What is the point? Is it happiness? Is it well-being? Is it love, success, family, relationship, communion? These things mean different things to different people. There's different ways that these ideas are laid out for different cultures, for different groups of people. Are any one of them right? Are all of them partly right? Is there one meta story, meta narrative that we should be aiming for? Is this something that we are meant to understand or should understand, or is it something that is meant to be a mystery? Are we going to realize and become aware of what this life's about at the end? When it's all over, we're going to get a revision and a review of our life. It's said that you get this review where you see and feel all the pain that you've caused others, all the sin that you've imparted on the world. Is that what happens? If it is, what do we do with that idea now? Are we good people? Am I a good person? I think in my head and I think in my heart that I'm a good person, and that I love my neighbors and my family, and that I try to do the right thing. But I don't know, is my definition of the right thing what the right thing is, or do I just justify things after the fact? What about what's happening in this world right now? We're seeing in the midst of Hurricane Laura that just made landfall in Louisiana. Terrible hurricane. One of the strongest ever. There's going to be loss of life, and obviously loss of property damage and destruction of hundreds, if not thousands, of people's lives, of their property, of everything that they've had. What do they do with that information in that reality? We're also dealing with a pandemic that is so ambiguous and so sensationalized and so politicized that it's hard to make heads or tails of it. We're dealing with political strife that I have never seen in my life, and both sides are absolutely certain that they are correct. There's no avenues of communication between the two sides. On the one side, you have the Black Lives Matter protest, which is it's a righteous protest when you think of the actual disparities between the powerful and the authorities, the police, and the people. It's couched as a racial thing, and that there is a racial component, but I can't help but think that it's more of a class thing, socioeconomic issue that is in the guise of a racial issue. Because if we looked at it as it is, as a socioeconomic class struggle, then I think we would start pointing the finger where it needs to be pointed, in my opinion, which is not at each other and at our neighbors and between individuals, and it needs to be pointed up, and not just at the police. In some real way, the police are just as much of a victim as the communities that they enact these terrible tragedies in. So I think there's a level above that we are channeled away from looking at. And I don't know if you want to look at it as specific politicians or the way that legislation is passed or the way that policies have affected communities for the past 50 to 60 years. Who's responsible for that, and what do we do about that? What do you, how would do you burn down and root and lie and riot and loot for terrible policy making? Or are we going to continue to be channeled into these division and divisive ways of interacting with each other? When I think things between the races and things between people individually, population here in America is getting better, and it has been getting better. And it seems like that the system, as even race relations, have improved. At least from my experience, I don't live in an inner city, but I think that things have been getting better, and it seems like the system feeds on divisiveness and racial division. It's so used to it that it's what's happening now. It seems like a simulation in terms of a protest. Not that So in the '60s there was the protests that were righteous, and if I was alive back then, I think I would join the protests. And this seems to be like a caricature of that. Not that there aren't actual real issues, but it seems that the death of George Floyd brought about a bunch of righteous anger, especially in the face of COVID lockdown and all of the tensions. But that righteous anger has been channeled towards nefarious and peculiar kind of ends. The donations that went to Black Lives Matter and the millions, if not billions, have not been going to communities and have not been going to support the communities that are experiencing these discrepancies from law enforcement. They're not going into retraining and removing, the bad police officers and replacing them with good ones. But we're talking about, defunding the police and abolishing the police. Again, it seems like an artificial way of continuing to divide the people from each other. Because if the people were to unite, if they were really to unite and turn their gaze at the structures and the people and the policies that have been put in place and are continuing to be put in place, then there would be actual change that happens. So there's just a lot of converging of high intensity events. Now, we have an election coming up in November. This is September here, or late August. And the perception is, for me and for many others that I've been talking with, that no matter which way the election goes, there's going to be another kind of shock to the system. And how many shocks to the system can an already debilitating populace take? How many can it take? And if it's the fact, then I feel that it is, that there are kind of nefarious or unconscious forces that are continuously driving and continuing to drive wedges between people, not just people that are, wedges are being driven between families and family members, between friendships and lifelong friendships. And it's continuing to increase and elevate. And I don't see a way forward where it doesn't come to a head in some way. Whether that will lead to some reconciliation or not, I don't know. But it seems that we're just in a real precarious state right now. So I don't know. I come back to the question of what are we to do? How are we to situate ourselves in these times? what I've been doing is trying to focus on what I can control, in a sense, or what's important to me is my family and those that are close. And I try to continuously reach out and talk with those that I haven't for a while, and keep the channels of communication open, and try to keep a level head when all of these stories that come out, and depending on what channel you watch or what news outlet you get your information from, again, it seems like it's not looked at critically, and both sides. Depends on what movie you're watching. 50% of the country is watching one movie, and 50% of the country is watching another movie, and these are completely contradictory movies. And leadership, those in power, our supposed leaders, are supposed to unite and help open bridges of communication between these two sides. But it seems like there are no grown-ups in the room at any level, any institution, whether it's political or economic, governmental, across the board. We have a lot of instability, and it's not really clear why. There's a speculation from one side that say that it's been a continuous disintegration of institutions that have happened through a concerted effort by a Soviet-style campaign that started, 60 years ago with these neo-Marxist ideas, or Marxist ideas, that were incorporated into the university system, and then eventually trickled their way down to the schools, grade school, and all of those folks that were going to school at that time in the 60s and the 70s have found their way into positions of power in media and in government and in the economic space in Hollywood. And there's just this animosity towards the American identity. All we have is critique. There's no positive outlook of what it is to be an American. And there are very valid critiques of this country, but to continuously denigrate and disintegrate the institutions and the culture and the history, the checkered history as it is, but to continuously denigrate it it's a self-defeating, self-terminating process. I mean, America is, they say that the original sin of the United States in its origin was racism. In the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, it says that all men are created equal. But it's clear that men were slaves to other men when this Constitution was written, and which is a terrible thing, of course, if you look at it through the lens of our contemporary zeitgeist. But that was the norm for the history of the world until it was abolished in the 1800s and the 1900s. And slavery was abolished by the West, essentially. In America, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery, and this idea was exported to the rest of the world and in England. So yes, there was horrible slavery and racism, but the idea that was put into play by our forefathers was brilliant. And it was a seed that was planted, a tiny seed that wasn't perfect in its, obviously, when it was first instantiated, but it grew into eventually the idea of all men be created equal, and eventually the consequence of ending slavery. Now, there's been a lot more problems since the end of slavery, but we need to address these problems. We need to figure these problems out, me and you and the population and leaders that we choose. This is not the case anymore. We cannot say that you feel that you're electing a candidate, no matter what party that you're in, that is looking out for the people, is looking out for the well-being of the people. The entrenched special interests and financial cohorts that have completely captured the political, and might have been always been like this, but it's become so intense that it has it's come to a boil, and um, what we can't do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to articulate and build a narrative of a way forward, um, or we're just going to have the disintegration of not just the West, the United States, but of you have the West as a whole. That's not a good thing. No matter how many terrible atrocities have been committed in the name of the West, so to speak, these ideas are malleable, and they can be up-leveled and upgraded to create a better world, a continuously bettering world. It's not going to happen through our politicians. It's not going to happen through the government. We continuously want to say, and the idea of Medicare for all, which I was for, because it's the idea, why wouldn't you, if we as a people can pool our resources together and make sure that none of our children and none of our very sick are put in a position where they are economically devastated because they got a disease or a sickness that wasn't their fault. Wouldn't it make sense to say that, you know what, I think we pool all of our resources together to build roads. We pool all of our resources together to have firefighters and police and mailmen. Why wouldn't we do the same for the health of our fellow man? But the problem is the state, the corruption that has so rotted the idea of the socius, of the social body, that we increase our taxes, we increase the resources that we give to the state, and there's absolute corruption. There's absolute no transparency into what happens. If there was a system where the distribution of taxes was transparent, where you got something every quarter to show where every dollar of your, every cent of your, not every cent, but even an approximation of where your tax money has been spent, roads, bridges, healthcare, you would see a lot more interest in people willingly, voluntarily giving giving resources to help take care of the health of others. And there's also a thought there that healthcare is, when we talk about healthcare, it seems that we are just talking about insurance, the configuration of insurance companies, and it's really weird. Healthcare should be thought of as the care of one's health, not disease management, not insurance claims, not coverage, not hundreds, not debating whether you're spending hundreds or thousands a month on insurance. That seems to be the conversation gets channeled to. And again, there are, forces that drive that conversation to that. But healthcare is about taking care of your health, right? It's about lifestyle. It's about what you eat. It's about urban planning. Like, the cities are built. I live in a new town, or a new suburb area here. And on every corner of every new street, there are several fast food restaurants. The way that our cities are set up, they channel us into very bad habits. And those bad habits eventually lead to disease. Not always. You do have genetic disorders, but a lot of it is lifestyle. And we are continuously funneled through these ways of and behaviors that drive disease. And then we wonder why chronic disease is the number one killer of human beings. Cardiovascular disease and diabetes is 60-70% of hospital admissions, and most of this is lifestyle. So we should be talking about how we should be setting up our cities and how we should be educating our families and our children about the importance of proper nutrition, of proper hydration, of proper exercise, of proper media intake. That's an important thing that I think gets lost. We pay a lot of attention, we try to, about what we put in our bodies and our mouths and our stomachs, but we don't talk about what we put in our consciousness, what we take in with our eyes. The programs that we see on Netflix and on television and the mainstream news is absolutely degenerating, decohering. There needs to be something. We need to have a new way to interact with our media. I mean, not to mention social media and Twitter. Twitter, I can't even come on, I can't even go on there. Like, I don't know. I've tried a couple times to start a Twitter page or whatever it is, and I just can't. It's just doesn't compute for me. But when I do, check through Twitter, or most of the news that people get is through Twitter, and the mainstream sources now react and interact with Twitter like it's the reality. Like, Twitter is the real, rather than, actual physical human interaction is not real. It's what happens on Twitter. And it's a strange platform and program. I'm kind of rambling here, but I don't, how do we take back our agency and our sovereignty? How do we take back our relationships? And again, here's where I get stuck to, what all you can do is focus on yours and hopefully be a good parent, a good brother, a good husband, a good neighbor. And that will have ripple effects where, you'll be able to, affect as many people that are in your network, and hopefully you'll have an impact on them and they will do the same, and that will kind of spread out. That is, that's kind of where I'm at right now. Then I also think, how can we use these derelict media channels that have completely controlling our lives now? How can we usurp them and short circuit them to put forth, life affirming and positive messages? What would that even look like? How do you do that without it being corny, and cliche? I don't know. I'm not a pessimist at all. I'm an optimist almost to a fault. So yeah, I don't even know if I'm gonna release this, but I wanted to just put some thoughts out there. And if you've listened this far, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching my videos. I appreciate that. And if you watch this far, if you have any feedback in terms of what type of content, what type of books you like to be reviewed, or if you'd like me to do live streams or whatever it may be, I'd appreciate any feedback. Probably putting this message here too late. Probably should have put it at the beginning of the video here. But anyways, I wish everyone well, and I appreciate everyone.